Welcome, Jasper, or Jasper, how should I pronounce it?
Jasper. Yeah.
Jasper, great. You just landed from Amsterdam, here in Oxford, well, in London, and then you came to Oxford. But it's really great to have you for the workshop on Scale Up tomorrow. So, yeah, take us away. Who are you, what do you do, and how did you find your way into Scale Up?
Well, very good to be here first. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Jasper Schuurmans. I studied chemical engineering in Eindhoven, originally from the Netherlands. And during my studies, I specialized to process technology in my master's. I did a brief internship at Janssen Pharmaceuticals, so part of Johnson and Johnson. There I worked at this department that was basically between discovery and actually going to the pilot plant. So they had to figure out how they can make conditions like more feasible for scale up, and also think about other aspects like if it crystallizes, how do you do the downstream processing and stuff like that. And then after that, I started my PhD with the Noel Research Group at the University of Amsterdam. And from the start, I've been involved in different projects. They basically focus on reactor modeling, reactor design, and reactor characterization. And at the same time, work on scale up with this. And then it's mostly oriented towards photochemistry. So actually using the energy of light, photons to drive chemistry. And to scale this up, I mean, all scale up is difficult, but this I would say adds an extra parameter to the challenge. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. So obviously, PhD is a good place to learn some, skills and how to do research in chemistry. You obviously you focus additionally on scale up. I think you already published some papers with some results, and I think you're going to present them tomorrow at the workshop as well. But maybe you can, summarize kind of what happened there. So how did you get into the problem? What were the challenges, and what did you eventually publish?
Yeah, of course I can. So actually, the publication I got involved in was based on prior research. It was actually a collaboration between two different groups. One group, the Noel Research Group, focusing on photochemistry. Another one focusing on reactor design, where they make high shear reactors. So the idea is you get a lot of forces pulling on your liquid, so it breaks apart, for example, gas bubbles. And they decided to actually combine these two techniques to make a photoreactor that has the same principles. And then they chose one reaction to scale up. It's a photochemical oxidation. So you use light, you use oxygen, which is a gas, and then you have your reagent and you go to your product. And actually, what they did there was going from very small scales, so like a small batch reactor, a test tube in the lab, and moving steps further to eventually come at a large scale high shear reactor. And during this process, they basically had some hypothesis on okay, probably this is happening, so if we want to improve scale up, we should do this. And then with experimental data, they can validate it. Then the project I got involved in actually took it one step further. So we already had a bit of a scaled up process. So we have 1 kg per day. And then we realized probably we need way more light in our system. And this was then a collaboration also with industry, with Signify, where we got a very high powerful light source. And then we managed to scale up the process even further with that. And again, looking at if we change this, what's going to happen and how can we improve it even further.
Yeah.
So we managed to make over 15 kgs per day if you extrapolate then the productivities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What you just said there. You said we realized we needed more light.
Yeah.
Well, how do you come to that realization, right? Because if we look at chemistry or biology, that's a pivotal moment. But it seemed to have worked out for you. You found a bigger light source, and you were able to scale it up. But why do you think you got to that place where you were like, oh, we need more light? Was it theory? Was it intuition? Or some data results?
I think mostly based on results. So in that sense, we know from our system which steps need to happen in order to get your product. So we have oxidation, so we have gas. We need that gas to go inside the liquid. And we need then, in the liquid, we need the reaction to take place. And for the reaction, you need then the gas, but also the light to be there. So what you can do is, for example, speed up how fast the gas goes inside the liquid. And if you see then that your productivity increases, you know this is a slow step, or at least slow enough to affect the outcome. So this is what we did. We had our reactor, we increased how fast the gas went in the liquid, but at some point we saw no further increase in the productivity.
Mm-hmm.
So we figured probably something else now becomes very slow. And based on the data we saw from batch and from flow, we realized, okay, probably we need more light in the system, just like that. So I would say it's based on data, but then also intuition behind it. Because for a different system, we saw a similar trend, and there we were like, okay, let's put more light in there. But it didn't really help the case. And then probably some intrinsic kinetics, so really the transformation of the molecule itself, could also be limiting, and then adding more light doesn't really help it anymore also.
I see. So you're kind of chasing the productivity and you're like, okay, let's increase the flow, and then you're like, okay, diminishing returns, you could say, and then you're like, okay, let's chase the light. So it seems like are you maxing out on the light as well?
Probably. Yeah, you should see it as you need to go from A to B to C to D, but if the step, for example, from B to C is the slowest, you want to increase that step so you get more D eventually in the end.
Amazing. Well, it's a great story. So this is published already, this work?
Yeah.
So people can look that up on the internet and find the paper and read some more details.
Yeah.
Are you working on any other scale-up challenges at the moment?
So at the moment, it's just ideas and like initial stage for now, but we try to see if we can like make more sense out of the data we do on small scale, because for this particular project we started small scale, but it's mostly to get used to the analytics and get a feel of the reaction. And then in the large scale we still need to run a lot of experiments to actually see which step is slow. So we hope to extract this data more easily from like the small scale experiments, so you waste less resources on that.
And when you say slow, you mean actual just time. So time is expensive.
And also like you can imagine if you run a reaction in a few milliliters, you don't waste a lot of material, but if you run a scaled up reaction, you talk about like maybe liters that you use, and you get the product out of there. I'm talking from academic standpoint, but to realize what's going on, you need the data rather than the product, and the data becomes then very costly in a sense. You need a lot of material to obtain it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So, it's great to hear these stories. So, from your perspective, what are kind of like the key bottlenecks in chemistry for scale up? Do you think we need better data analytics? You mentioned that just now. Or do we need a stronger fundamental, understanding of chemistry? Or are engineers just fine with chasing, yield without understanding the basics? What works for you? What do you see makes sense in the future? But also maybe what do you think you might be underestimating right now?
Well, that's a difficult question.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, which I would say is the chemical engineer inside of me, if you have a chemistry, you should figure out which steps take place, and from these steps, which one is the slowest, or at least slow enough to like influence the productivity, and think about how to increase this. But what I also see in at least the field of photochemistry is that there's a lot of different reactors out there. You have like a reactor where you actually pump your fluids through, or like a batch reactor where you dump your liquid in and then you shine light on it. But what I see a lot is most publications, they don't characterize the light source, for example, so you don't really know how much light is going in there. Makes it very difficult to compare results and also make like valid assumptions on what's going on there. So if you have the same reaction in two reactors, in one it works and one it doesn't, why is that the case?
Yeah.
Can you characterize it? Can you think beforehand already like, oh, maybe I should change this to get better results? What I underestimate, while working with a lot of chemists, I would say what I underestimate is chemistry. I feel like chemistry sometimes is just weird. It can behave very oddly. People can actually make a mistake in the lab and doing something that doesn't make sense, but getting way better results eventually. So I think there is always gonna be this like unpredictability of the chemistry that you don't know what it will give in the end.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. So tomorrow we have Morten Nielsen at the workshop giving a training, 2-hour training on design of experiments. And actually, if you look at some of his material, he says like, identifying the sources of uncertainty and noise is very important. It kind of makes sense, right? If we're trying to measure something, even yield, and let's say we run the same experiment 3 times and we get vastly different yield outputs, how are we going to learn, right? It's such an unreliable system. So kind of building on what you said, what are ways that you try to reduce noise in your work? There could be any noise, like a sensor or people not being very accurate with the work. What's the number one noise reducer for you?
I think repeating experiments is the number one, and then also characterization of your reactor. So what we see in chemical engineering is you have different types of reactors where it can also matter when you sample, for example, that can lead to different results. So that's also an important thing to take into account. And actually going to large scale, it's easier or more accurate to weigh things than at a very small scale. So that also helps in reducing the error, I would say. But mostly like repeat the experiment, make sure it's reproducible is step one. Of course, there's always going to be some margin of error, but that's the first one, I would say.
Nice. Okay. Let's see. Do you have any opinions on biology?
Very few.
Very few.
Yes.
So scaling up processes is not necessarily just a chemical or chemistry problem, but in biology we might have cells we want to scale up. In some ways you can look at semiconductors as well as a scale-up problem. How do you produce at the high enough yield as you increase production and so forth. So do you think there are some general patterns in scale-up that apply not just to chemistry, but maybe just in general? If you talk to someone in biology, semiconductors and other areas, what would you recommend them to do to, make the scale-up project a success?
Well, I think, I mentioned before, the key is to fully understand your system. In that sense, for chemistry, we try to do the same reaction in a very small footprint reactor because it's also beneficial in terms of safety. To do that, we get this high shear reactors. I don't know how well that would translate to working with cells. I think you would break the cells with that. So that's different considerations that come into play there, I would say. But yeah, knowing which steps are slow, why they are slow, and if you can do something about it, I would say is the main thing that I saw in my work that helps with scaling up.
Nice. So you mentioned you had done an internship before?
Yeah.
And that was your first touch point with scale up?
So for my master's project, I already got involved in these reactor types. So I did my master's project with the other group, which we collaborated with. And there I already got involved a bit in like working with larger scale processes than at least working in test tubes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then that's quite a unique position. You come out of a kind of master student level, then into an industrial setting. Now you're back in a PhD. You might be moving back into industry or maybe working in a university collaborating with industry. What were kind of like the markedly different approaches in academic setting and industry setting, right? Because you have now a publication on scale up. Do you think a company can take that and use that in a beneficial way, or are there some steps missing?
Well, actually, it's funny or interesting that you mentioned this, because the publication we did was in collaboration with people who worked at the same department I did my internship. So my personal experience, the difference is that in academia, we care a lot about what's going on and why it's going on. In industry, they also care, but more to achieve the end goal of producing it in large scale. And if it takes too long, they might just say, okay, we will just go with the best we have, and we stop investing time in that. And I think, for photochemical purposes, in pharmaceutical industry, I know some companies are like more and more investing in that. There's also publications from a lot of different pharmaceutical companies on photochemistry. But I would say still it's relatively new, especially the scale-up of these photochemical processes, because there are so many challenges associated with it. So I think it could be useful, and also together with other people working in the field of photochemical scale-up, they publish very interesting work combining high-power light sources with high shear reactors.
Yeah, that sounds like you do already have then that bridge into industry, which seems quite crucial, right? So how much do you think scientists need to be integrated across that whole kind of value chain or development chain, from like taking a scale up result all the way kind of to the market, to like, you know, your grandma now can buy something in the supermarket, or some company can acquire a certain chemical that usually is really expensive. How much do you think scientists at the very early stage should be involved with that, or if at all? Yeah.
That's again a very, very good, interesting question. I think like people who make new methodologies, so people who actually invent a new chemistry, let's put it like that, they maybe not always have this in mind, but at the same time they might think very differently and come up with very cool or unique ways to make molecules. But I would say then the people actually scaling up should adopt this and actually think about how to get it on the market and go from there. So I think this very early stage discovery, they shouldn't be too concerned yet, but because it might restrict the way they work and might restrict then also what they find out of there. But I think, yeah, the next first steps is like adopting it, see if it's suitable for scale up, and then also for industry production and going to the market.
Nice. So how would you describe then a day in your life as a chemist in scale up? Do you wake up and you wonder, how's this economically feasible going to work, or do you wake up and you're like, why did my experiment not work, yesterday? What's your focus? What do you run through usually?
So I think, yeah, again, it's academia, so the stakes are in that sense lower, that if it fails, there is probably always something to learn from it, why it failed, so you can improve on that like next time. I think going from the very small lab scale experiments to actually the big work, the first time running like the big reactors, those are very interesting times, interesting days, and a lot that you learn from that, like how to operate the reactor, and also like recognizing patterns. For example, if you see already a different color coming from the outlet, you're like, okay, something different happened this time, what could be going on? And then gaining further understanding in like hydrodynamics, how the reactor works. You get the results out of there, you get the data, you have a look at the data, and then you start thinking about, okay, we increased, for example, mixing, what's going to happen? We see nothing. Can we calculate actually how much light we put in our system, and can we like relate that to how many products we get to see if that makes sense? I think, yeah, data analysis is really a key part in this. Experimental, even the scale up, like the very large scale experiments, sometimes they take only seconds, especially with this very high powerful light source. You make liters of solution, it passes through the reactor in a few seconds, and you have to collect the data in like 1 hour, and then the day is already over. And it's really about thinking which experiments you want to do, which ones are important, and then analyzing the data to make sense out of it.
I mean, from what I know, working in an actual lab can be extremely frustrating, and you need a lot of, like patience. Do you work on weekends as well? Some PhD students do that, of course, especially in biology. I'm not sure if in chemistry you have to do that as well, depending on the experiment. But if you think of, a undergrad or a master's student, maybe thinking about going into a PhD, first question, who should consider scale-up questions as part of their academic career? And then if people are interested in that, for those potential students, what are some kind of skills that you think they can invest now that can help them in that scale-up journey?
Well, I think people who should do scale-up are people that are very interested in scale-up, first of all. I think having like a different background, like some chemical engineering to know what's going on with hydrodynamics, some chemistry to also figure like, okay, which transformation am I actually doing? Does this make sense? But also, as I hope to learn more about actually tomorrow, the statistics part on screening different conditions and like getting trends out of there. And of course, modern day AI machine learning is also very big. And I think that's also going to help a lot in scale up, especially in like translating from these small processes to bigger ones later on.
Would speaking of modern day machine learning or artificial intelligence, is there anything you see at your frontier of people using that to tackle chemistry or specifically scale up? Are there some positive results, or do you think we're still very much kind of like at the beginning of it? And it could be anything, of course. You might just ask ChatGPT, how does this reaction work? Or you ask it, what should I do next? So have you seen anyone give that a try, and what were the results?
So publication-wise, I would say machine learning is mostly, in chemistry at least, focused on like predicting reactivity or optimizing other reactivities, which then combines very well with the automation part that's going on a lot with chemistry. For scale-up, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen any publications on this. And in general, it's very limited because I think it's very expensive also to investigate scale-up, because you need a lot of material, a lot of like specialized reactor designs. And I think like having a foot in with industry helps a lot with that, and maybe a lot of groups don't have this capabilities yet. Yeah.
Nice. Footing with industry. Actually, I remember I was at ChemAI 2 years ago, I think in 2023. I think that was the first time ChemAI was running. I mean, artificial intelligence wasn't a buzzword that it is today, but it was at that so-called Lab 42. I'm not sure if that's where you're based as well, but do you feel like Amsterdam and Netherlands in general is actually going into a really good direction of kind of overlapping industry and university, and how could that be improved?
So yeah, I'm on the same campus as the Lab 42. On that sense, I must be honest and say I don't know exactly what's the current status of this with AI, with industry, and with getting funding and positions and collaboration between that. I know in my PhD we collaborated then with Signify, and also then again with Janssen, the pharmaceutical company. So yeah, it is there. I also know other people who collaborate with different companies, and I think it's also important with keeping an eye on, okay, yeah, we're doing fundamental research, but what will be the value then after that, like the next steps?
Yeah, nice. I mean, speaking of pharma companies, so of course, roughly speaking, in a pharma company, you will do chemistry, but the point of a pharma company is, of course, to deliver kind of drugs and treatment, for healthcare. Do you think there's something specifically interesting about scale up in the pharma space? And does it really set apart from the rest of chemistry? And what would that be?
I think pharma mostly focuses on like scaling up the chemistry part. I think that's very interesting on its own, because I mean, I'm a chemical engineer, but I really like chemistry. That's, I think, also why I'm that interested in scale up. It like brings a lot of chemistry inside the chemical engineering. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I think it's more like, of course, we have a wider space of chemistry than just pharma. We've got BASF, or for example, Merck Germany doesn't just do healthcare spaces, also electronics and so forth. So I personally always feel like there's somewhat of a markedly different approach when it comes to working now and scaling up, let's say Ozempic. So I think there's some stories about Novo Nordisk not being fast enough in scaling up essentially the production, right? And so we have a shortage, and then people might go back and be like, well, shouldn't we have started asking that scale up question earlier? So I think there's much more at stake with a drug and delivering the drug in a scale than maybe some other chemicals where the market isn't as high pressure and important. So yeah, that's kind of the difference. I don't know if you see that difference as well, given your experience.
I think that's, well, the beauty, if I can say, of the pharmaceutical industry is that they get these relatively new molecules with unknown or like unconventional chemistry they have to scale up, which is a massive challenge if you compare to like plastic production. It's all streamlined. It's okay, maybe I shouldn't say simple, but like, let's say relatively simple chemistry in that sense. And here there might be like reagents that are very difficult to get, or it's a very, very exothermic or temperature sensitive reaction. And there's a lot of things to take into account and to to take into consideration when scaling up a system from this small scale to the bigger scale. And I think that's why I'm very much interested in especially chemical scale up in pharmaceutical industry. It's these not straightforward molecules under not straightforward conditions, and how do you tackle that rather than finding small improvements, for example, in more streamlined chemistry.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a quote: "Most yield problems are human problems, not technical ones." What do you think of that?
Most yield problems?
Yeah, so like trying to increase the yield of something, and we're like, let's throw more different reactor types at it, or more AI. But really, like, when you look really close, you realize that, like, people fall ill, you know, people don't like AI, you know, people don't want to learn statistics, people really like this one reactor and believe it will fix everything. So do you think kind of like resistance to change and hierarchical structures and old ways of doing things, which are human things, are maybe one of the biggest problems, in fact, for scale up?
Well, I wouldn't know if it's one of the biggest, but yeah, I think, it's a problem. Like if you have the paved path that you know you can go down and you are convinced it works, of course, everyone wants to go that way. If you have to invest a lot of time to learn a new skill, it might seem beforehand, oh, I don't want to invest this time to learn this new skill. I will just keep on going with what I'm used to. But then I think we all know eventually you need to adapt the new skill, so later on you save the time and get better results out of that.
Yeah, great. So here's another question. If it doesn't scale by 10 times, it won't scale at 1,000 times.
Yeah, I think so. It shouldn't. Like, I mean, there is certain characteristics at least that you sort of know that you're changing when scaling a system. And if you already see issues coming up with going from small to medium scale, yeah, it's going to be very challenging to go even further with that. But I think it's then the key to like pinpoint the challenges you see from small to medium, so you can actually tackle the challenges and then more efficiently can go to 1,000 times more.
Yeah.
If it's possible. Sometimes it's just the chemistry is annoying, or there's other things going on that you don't fully can understand why it's not working, or the crystals are too big, or the crystals are not forming, and sometimes it just doesn't happen, and you keep on wondering why, and sometimes you just have to then accept it and move on to something else.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, so, you know, these were a range of questions here just to map out where we are and what you do, but if we just all bring it down to like one point, what is it that you are most passionate about right now? Like, what is it that you think you could talk about for hours, you know? Is it a certain reaction? Is it a certain cool new reactor? What is it that drives you right now?
I would say photochemistry, and then combine it with the design of photoreactors. So in that sense, I worked a lot on like characterizing light sources, modeling light sources, then with like ray tracing simulations, so you can already get an idea of where the light is going in your system, and then use that to design efficient photoreactors. We actually have this archive that came out, I think, a few months ago, where we then combine this with, we have a light source, we know where the light is going based on a simulation, and we print a reflector with 3D printing, and then we vary the shape of the reflector in each simulation, and then couple it with machine learning to find the optimal reflector shape to get the light most efficiently to the reactor itself. So I think this project, I mean, it's at the end of my PhD. It combines very nicely a lot of the things I did during the PhD, so that's very nice. And I would say, I like it a lot, the 3D printing, the modeling of the reactor, and then also thinking about if the models make sense. So maybe this is also a tool later on in scale up that you can simulate rather than doing a lot of experiments. You can couple it with simulations. I mean, you always need to do some experiments to get an idea, and also to know if your model actually makes sense, yes or no. So that's also what we did. We couple it with experiments, and then we know our simulations are like trustworthy. They give reasonable numbers at least, so we can very confidently replace the experiments with the simulations. And then you can all of a sudden run 100 simulations a day while you do other stuff, work on other projects, or drink coffee, whatever you want. And if you want to do experiments, you can maybe do 2 or 3 experiments a day, and that's like a 10-hour working day maybe, for example, and you're constantly in the lab running around, and it's very different. So I would say I like this a lot, like integrating the simulation part. We now did it then for ray tracing, so like modeling light, but I think it's also I mean, there's also very nice other work out there with computational fluid dynamics. So like seeing how a fluid moves, for example, through a reactor, and then coupling that with some experimental techniques to see if it makes sense, and then coupling with machine learning to efficiently, for example, design reactors or mixers and this kind of things.
Nice. I mean, 2 questions. The first one is, I didn't know you can print a reflector. And then the second one is, how much do you trust simulations? So it was interesting you just said, and then we ran some experiments to see, whether they're reliable or not. Let's move first one into the just side question here. How do you print a reflector?
So, I mean, we don't print a reflector, so we 3D print a shape, and then we put like a reflective tape on there. So in that sense, you can have a lot of different shapes by printing. I mean, the accuracy is very high, and it's a technique we got very much used to in the lab. And then we just buy reflective tape from a market, like a DIY market.
DIY, yeah.
And then we just put it on the like printed shape, and then we have the reflector.
So you print kind of like a parabola or something?
Yeah, for example.
Is there any funny shapes you come up with as well that are unexpected? I mean, the machine learning suggests to you, I guess, some parameters for how to have the curvature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we parameterized basically the curvature of the reflector, and then indeed we saw a lot of weird shapes coming by that might not be very well printable, but we also saw some peculiar shapes that we didn't think of ourselves that actually ended up being the best ones that we evaluated. Yeah.
And that's on archive as well?
Yeah, it's on archive, yes.
And then coming to the simulations, of course, so, when you tackle a scalar problem, you want to kind of like get as many telemetry points on what's going on. So you have your intuition, not to be underestimated, you have your theory, then you have your data that at times might contradict all of these things. But then there's simulations, right? So based on an idea that physical principles let us derive and simulate, I guess, photon interaction or DFT or fluid dynamics and so forth. I think it's reasonable to assume that sometimes simulations work well, sometimes they don't. So what's your experience with that? Do you sometimes feel like the simulation was completely useless, or do they actually at times correlate really well with your intuition or the experiments you see?
Actually, the first project we did on like doing simulations, which was at the start of my PhD, I started on that right away. One of the reviewers said, you still have to run experiments. So how do you justify like doing simulations? But we were like, yeah, but we need to know if our simulations actually couple well to reality or not. And if we don't do experiments, we will never know if what we're simulating makes sense. So yeah, if you make a model, any model, I would say maybe with DFT, it's very hard to actually experimentally validate what's going on. But we see with ray tracing, there's like chemical techniques to get the exact same information you would get with ray tracing. Then you might ask, when is it enough? Well, we printed a few reactors, we lined them with the tape, and then we run these experiments, like these chemical experiments, where you get the same information as you would get with the simulations, and we just compare them, and we see, okay, it's the same. And in these simulations, we model reflectivity, which we also get in the actual experiments. So it's not like, oh, you only have light hitting your system directly, which makes it way easier. We think about like which reactors we should print in order to get like a representative idea for the model. And also important not to fit data like on the experiments you use for validation. It should really be like you have your simulations, and you can set up your simulations by fitting it on data, of course. I mean, sometimes you need something in the real world that you cannot really well describe. So for these light sources, we sometimes like measure the intensity, or we measure the distribution. Like that, it's experimental technique also. But then if you do the validation, you should really be careful not to use any data that you actually fed in the model, because then it's going to look very well. Well, in reality, it doesn't have to be like that.
Fascinating. Yeah, but I had another question based on that. But it's left my mind now. I have to cut this out. No, that's cool. So here it comes again. Modularity, right? So again, I'm coming from the statistics, machine learning perspective here, but there's a work where they also parameterized a shape of a plastic cone, I think, or a spring, and then they try to figure out the most strong plastic 3D printed string. It's a work from Boston University, I think. Very similar. I mean, basically the same thing that you do with your reflection system. And their hypothesis was that, well, if we can get this small spring made 3D printed, then we can just modularly, combine it to make a big spring. So with your scale-up work, when you look at a new kind of reactor system, when that goes into industry, do they just take it and then try to make it bigger? Or is the idea to just build 100 of them and then just run them in parallel? So how would that work?
So I think for photochemistry, then to come back to that, one of the techniques you can also do is to intensify like the process. So you make the conditions more harsh, so to say. So you can actually perform the same transformation in a scaled up fashion in the same small reactor type. So what we did is we have the reactors like this size, let's say, okay, like 20 mLs, let's put it like that. We run the reaction, we go 1 kilogram per day, and then we think, okay, the light source might be limiting. So what you can also do is, of course, is like place 20 smaller or 20 of the same reactions like next to each other and run it 20 times. But we thought, okay, if we just make a very, very powerful light source with the same reactor, can we get also like the productivity times 20? And this is something we saw, and I think this is also a field where a lot of people are still doing research on, like how can we intensify conditions to make them more suitable for scale up, so you have a small footprint reactor with a very high productivity rather than either very big reactors or a lot smaller reactors next to each other.
Well, in statistics, there's a theorem called the no free lunch theorem. I'm sure that applies to other things as well, but I refer to it a lot, which is basically that, wherever you have a gain, you usually lose somewhere else. So I'm wondering, as you have discovered to drive up the performance by using a different higher light source, is there anything that you lost on the way?
High power light source comes with more light, so to say, but it also comes with the production of way more heat. So what we needed to do is actually like actively cool the light source before we could just like buy a light source and just put it, and then the air basically around it cools it. For this one, it was not possible anymore. We really needed to make a cooling bath to make sure the light keeps cooled. And also in the reactor itself, any light that basically does not react, at some point it gets converted into heat, which means that the reaction mixture inside your reactor is going to heat up a lot. For us, this was not the biggest concern. We didn't see any temperature effect on the productivity of the reaction. But if you operate it for longer times, it might cause like very high temperature increase on your mixture, which might not be beneficial. Then we work with oxygen, we work with organic solvent, which is not ideal with high temperature in terms of safety also.
So when you say not ideal, could you just elaborate for the non-chemists?
So if you have an organic solvent, it can evaporate with higher temperatures, and then you get like basically flammable vapor with oxygen, which is like the perfect recipe for an explosion.
Okay.
Yes, which is of course something you don't want.
Yeah. So we got high yield, but we also got a risk of explosion, and we also need to figure out a way how to cool the whole thing down.
Well, we managed to make like a safe process. Yeah. So eventually we cooled the reactor, or we cooled the light source. We like cool everything that comes out of the reactor, and we flush it with nitrogen, and then also the storage, we flush it with nitrogen to get rid of all the oxygen. So yeah, that's also, if you want to intensify, you also need to make sure it's still safe. Then the other, no free lunch, let's say it like that. So it can be that the system doesn't scale well with the light source. It can be that you like intensify the light intensity times 20 while your productivity only goes up times 2, because there is other aspects coming into play when you want to intensify the light source. And in that sense, it would have been way more beneficial to just put two reactors next to each other.
I see. Yeah. Is that something you're interested as well in terms of like how to make that calculation economically? Should we go with two reactors next to each other? Or is that something that you, for your personal skill set, see someone else doing? That's something you would work with?
I would say I would really like the fundamentals. Like, why would it not scale with light intensity, for example? What can we do, and which step is then becoming limiting, or how can we design it in a way that it actually works better? Academia again, I would say the techno-economic, it's coming more. I see more and more papers on the techno-economic assessments about things. I think it's interesting, but my main interest lies like in really understanding what's going on.
Of course, yeah. And I mean, we just discussed over lunch, but I think there's a strong argument, of course, that in one way we want to integrate the whole scale-up journey. In the other way, it doesn't really make sense that people need to do everything. It should be more people specialize, and we use the paradigm of manufacturing, of delegating those sets to other people. But yes, I mean, it's interesting. You say you see more techno-economic analysis. Is that something that just some of your research peers are doing, or Google send you some recommendations, or is that something you found just really rising in interest?
Well, I wouldn't know if it's like of the last years, but maybe based on my way to do literature study and going to different conferences, I get exposed to it more. But I see that a lot of people are working on this and thinking already about like is this going to be feasible?
Right.
I also heard from some like projects that you actually need to do technical economic assessments. It's part of the funding, so they can like make a bridge between then academia and like bringing something actually to the market.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, is there any question that you would like to ask me?
What are your expectations about the whole workshop, and what are you planning on like taking away from it?
Yeah, great question. I was going to ask you that afterwards,
Okay.
but no,
I stole it.
Yeah, yes. My expectations is to ultimately just have really good collaboration. So we have, a lot of chemists coming around, but we got biologists, we've got the alternative protein people coming in, and we got, a variety of countries as well. So I think we really managed not to have a monoculture, but really, really different perspectives. And so we kind of like scheduled it in a way that the hard things happen first and then the fun things come after. But we do start, of course, with, 2 hours on statistics, design of experiments. And I think that's going to be really crucial to kind of like set the limits of what we can do with data and AI for the afternoon. But then in the afternoon, I'm really looking forward, to your talk. So we're starting with that after lunch as the keynote. And then we have these more lightning talks, which I hope really are, small impulses. Because I don't think there was a point in having 2 or 3 speakers and then no kind of like really good perspective on what are all the parts of the scale-up journey. But then at 3 p.m. over tea, we're going to have that sharing is caring session, I call it. So we're going to get into small groups, and then people just have to figure out, depending on where they are in the scale-up journey, what the next steps are. And then in a whole group with the 30 or so participants, that's going to be discussed. And so I think that part I'm most excited about. So like we're going to all have to do a little bit of homework, do a little bit of statistics, but Morten has prepared some really fun interactive ways to do that. So it really shouldn't be boring equations and maths. But then in the afternoon, putting that into practice, and then we're finishing with a kind of like brainstorm session. What are the next steps in scale up? And that's the whole point of the workshop, really. The workshop isn't a once and done scenario, but really this is kind of the first mini step, and like doing more in the space and getting people into a room. And so it's all about the people. I don't, in a way, of course, humans are the problem. That means you also have to work with humans to get these things done. So those are my expectations for that. But is there anything specific that you look forward to from a chemistry perspective?
I'm actually looking forward to like getting these different viewpoints of all the people with the different backgrounds that are coming. I mean, we were talking about it on the way here. I didn't realize there were so many different disciplines involved in scale up. For me, it was like, oh, we have the chemistry, we have the chemical engineer, and you go to produce it. But of course, it has a lot of different other sides, which I'm very eager to learn more about. About.
Yes, sounds great. Okay, any final words then before we conclude here?
Yeah, really looking forward to tomorrow. So I would say that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming by. Thanks for sharing your experience on Scale Up, your journeys. We're gonna have your papers linked somewhere with this recording so people can read that. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.